Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. We're going to try to be very time efficient tonight and give you your due time to talk without us later. So we will get started right away. Turn it over to Mr. Carlson.
Actually, I'm first.
Okay, I lied. Turn it over to Dr. Scanlon.
That's okay. So what's coming around to you right now, as per your request last meeting, which was last week, or the week before? Week before. It's all a blur.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. It's all a blur now. Is the class size enrollments for the elementary level. So this is the same chart, Excel sheet, that we use when determining staffing on a yearly basis for at least the past 13 years. So we've been using these numbers. So this is as of Friday's enrollment dates. Every Friday we update the data in our system. So we adjust, and it's funny because laughably from week to week, sometimes we'll say, okay, we went down one in one class and up two in another, and then it keeps going and going. So it's broken down. AR obviously stands for Arrowhead, MN is Minnesota, MT is Mount, NA is Nassaquag, ST is Setauket. The SCT is the number of sections in each of those grade levels, and then next one over is the average class size, ACS. If you look all the way over to the far right, and you'll see district. Now that's the total number in each of the grade levels, and the number of sections we have in each of the grade levels in the elementary, and the average class size in the district. The numbers in the last column are the contractual averages, with the exception of pre-K. That's 18, that's set at the state level. If we go above that, we would have to add additional staffing in there. So that's what it is in the contract currently. I will tell you that those numbers have been in position in the contract since I started as a teacher here in 1996. Yes, and probably way before that. So that has not changed much. So when you look down the column, the far left column, you'll see the grade, the pre-K, K, all the way down. ALC is our self-contained classes, and some of those students do push into some of the classes. So when you see a low number in a section, in a particular building, why is the average class size so small in that building? It may be because some of those ALC students are pushing into some of those classes. IG is also broken out. We can give you the numbers by each of the, it's 4, 5, 6 right now, but they're all over at Nassaquag. One thing I will tell you, as of just this past month, the number of students in special education classes has now gone up higher at Minnesota than Setauket. So years ago, Setauket and Arrowhead were our two main special education elementary buildings. It's now Minnesota and Arrowhead. Setauket's actually taking a few less of those students. What that has done for us is it's allowed us to keep some of the students in their catchment areas, their home schools, as opposed to moving them out, which on the other hand of that saves us a little bit on transportation, so we're not transporting students from all over the district in different areas. So these are the numbers. We will be looking at this because of the financial circumstances under about increasing some of the class sizes in some of these areas. We have a staffing meeting tomorrow, although 2 hours delayed because of the storm coming in, to review this with all of the administrators. That's a chance for the principals to come in and advocate for that not to change, and it's for our point to say that we might have to change in some capacity. The thing that will change in the pre-K sections next year, every building across the district will be only 36, not 40, because we're capping it at 18. So while we have 195 students in the pre-K program today, next year we will be capped at 180. And obviously that might restrict some people from being able to be in the program here, but there are a number of different pre-K programs in the area. It comes down to, you saw the pre-K stuff we did at one of the last meetings about why we're doing that. We would hope to eventually have a full day program and hope to have the ability to have the money in the budget to be able to support that. It's just not a feasibility from the budgetary standpoint for next year. Now, while we said elementary class size, I just want to remind you that we did give you the secondary full class size report that we gave to the board in December. We provided to you in December. We have the synopsis of that as well. So in our elementary schools, the average class size across all these grade levels is 20. So that's what it is. Now, for the secondary, we break it down differently. We go by different numbers of students in sections. So it's 0 to 15, 16 to 20, 21 to 25, 25 to 26 to 29, 30 and above. So this current year, there are at Jolinas 2 core academic classes that are above 29. There are 27 sections with 15 or less. At Murphy, there are 2 core academic sections with 29, and there are 19 sections with 15 or less. At Ward Melville, there are 32 core academic sections above 29, and there are 105 less than 15 or less, which has led us to the issue of why we sent out the letter earlier last month about how we're changing the sign-ups for courses and the maneuvering that occurs after August distribution. We have to stop that in order to stop the staffing implications and budgetary implications for us, and it leads to those massive imbalances. I will tell you, in July, that number was not 105 at Ward Melville High School. It was equivalent to Murphy and Jolinas, so it was in the 30s. But because of all the maneuvering that occurs with schedules, we had a massive movement the other direction. So we're trying to put a kibosh to that so that by June, we will know exactly how many students. Now, this does not account for people that move in over the summer, and that's in any school district. You'll have movement in and out. People generally don't tend to leave school districts during the middle of the year unless jobs or financial circumstances necessitate it. Or you have a big vacation. When we have a 2-week vacation in December, we get a lot of movement. The last time we had one of those, we had about 25 students show up on our doorstep on January 3rd. So it was very interesting that year. But that generally does not happen. So I will take any questions about the class size report for the elementary and then for the secondary. I will give you just one more tidbit of information. Because, again, of our circumstances, we use 25 as our divider in all of the secondary classes when we look at how many sections we're running. But again, because of our financial circumstances, the directive now that we have given out is in 11th and 12th grade, and in the 8th grade for next year, we're using 27 to see how much that will change our staffing. Again, we have to be careful with that because we do have contractual obligations and logical class sizes that we don't want to exceed. Now, when we say some of this, we're not talking about special education classes like resource rooms. They're not in that report. That's excluded. So any of our special area pieces where we have those type of things, those are regulatory. We can't change any of that. Resource room classes are capped at 5. That's regulatory. We cannot do anything like that. And overall, 25 students for a teacher with special education if they're solely teaching resource room. So that's our current numbers where we stand. So right now, I will let you know what we're looking at potentially is an elementary staffing cut of around 14 FTEs for next year. Elementary, yes.
Good question. So the contractual obligations for the teachers, is that district-wide, or is that per school? Is that per grade?
Elementary, and so what you see on that far right column for the elementary, that has to be across the district in the elementary level. So 23 average across the district. So not by school, across the district. In secondary, it's for all courses except for English, it's 150. The average load that a teacher can carry. So you could have a teacher carry more than 150. You could have a teacher carry less than 150 students in their caseload in their classes. For English, it's set at 135. And again, both of those numbers have also been in the contract for a long, long time. And there comes a point where we were actually discussing this much earlier than this whole budgetary process about where today should our numbers be. Because a class size, we all can say, oh, in my day I had X number of kids in a classroom. That's not true and able to be done anymore. I will give you an example. So when I taught in a parochial school in Connecticut, my smallest class was 40. I had 7 preps. I taught 8 periods out of 9. I had a club and I had a sport, and I made a whopping $18,000 a year. And I drove from Huntington to Stamford every day, 2 hours, and back, and taught 4 nights a week in Brentwood High School. So and I did the Brentwood High School piece for 10 more years. I got a job in my third year in Three Village, and when I was hired, Joyce Lynn asked me, what's your class size? I explained that number to her. She goes, well, when you come to Three Village, your average class size is going to be 25, and we're going to pay you $42,000. And I took the pen out of her hand and said, where do I sign? And she said, don't you want to think about it? And I said, if I go home and tell my wife I thought about it, I'd come back with a bandage on my head and still be signing. So why don't I get over the pain now and avoid all of that? So it was a much different world than I lived in a private school setting. So the 40 was the smallest class because that was my AP course that I taught. So they said, we'll give you a smaller class, we'll give you 40. So I had kids sitting on radiators in that room. City system was the same way.
But besides a private school, city school, we've changed in
Dramatically.
what is expected of a teacher to get done, in what the needs of the students are, in just what we're trying to fit in curricularly
Right.
to give the students that kind of individual attention. To max class sizes too far, I
Right.
think we all recognize we have to find that sweet spot.
So, for instance, when you look at this sheet, you'll see highlighted in yellow at Mount Elementary School, 2 of the classes, why that seems to be very low, the 2 4s, because last year we had a massive influx of E&L students in those classes, the ratios in those classes. In one class, there are 9 out of 21 students that are E&L. So it's a dynamic change. And when you have students who are at different levels in E&L, some who have very limited English proficiency, and some not at all. In those 2 particular classes, we have what's called SIFE students. Those are students with interrupted formal education. That means for a minimum of 2 years, they have not been in an actual classroom anywhere. So that number each year in this district increases. So not as high as some other districts, but high for us. And there's special training that has to go on with that, professional development that goes on with that, cooperative learning with the aides and the TAs and the E&L teachers, with the special education teachers and also the general education teachers, so we can have students in E&L and special education simultaneously. And the dynamic in kindergarten at Mount right now is we had to add 2 SCAs and a TA this year to the kindergarten because of that exact same problem, just to avoid some of the issues we were seeing. And it's not behavioral. It's not a behavioral issue. It's just the needs of students, to Brian's point. Some of the special education students are requiring far more than we've ever seen required before. So, and we do try to do a lot ourselves in Three Village, probably much more than other districts would do, and not send out students to BOCES. Jeff did a presentation last year on the cost implications of that, which is more cost effective for us. If we have space for classes, it would make sense to keep most of our students in our 811s, our 1211s, and our 1511 classes. But there comes also a point of what is the most least restrictive environment for those students to get their education to. And sometimes for those students, this may not be the most appropriate setting. It might be they need a behavioral setting in a BOCES program or or residential treatment program, which we do have students in all those type of things right now as well. So any questions about the class size report? Yes, Jim. Jim, just sit on your mic.
Sorry, anyway.
So Kevin, you said next year you're potentially thinking about cutting 14 FTEs. Now, would that be pre-K through 5 as opposed to pre-K through 6 as this is listed right now?
Yes,
since-
pre-K through 5. That's
Okay.
not through 6. 6 is going to the, now will be middle schools. That staffing is set in place already. There's 16 general education teachers in place, 2 STEM teachers, yes, 2 FLES teachers, which are in the process of hiring, and we have 1 elective course that we're running between the 2 schools with the same teacher.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? And if you wish, we can send this to you in a, electronically. It is an Excel sheet. You feel free to manipulate it any way you want, maneuver the numbers around, ask any questions. After tomorrow's meeting with the administration and the district, next meeting here, we can provide you what the numbers will look like, so that there'll be a second chart below this one for our next meeting. Seeing none.
Yeah, all right, hang on, I'll
Oh.
ask that for you.
All right, all right.
All right, so if I'm reading this correctly, so there's 8 All right, so let's look at Arrowhead, the sections. So if we add up the sections, we should have the total number of teachers.
Correct.
So at Arrowhead, there's a total of 32 teachers.
Yes. 30, we call it classroom teachers. FTEs, that's what, full-time teaching equivalents, that's what we refer to it as, FTEs.
Right, and then how many other specials and auxiliary and whatever else?
Didn't ask for
are-
that.
Well,
We can
but-
get you that staffing. I think Jeff gave you some numbers in an email earlier today, but he might not have given you those
That
numbers.
was total,
People,
employees
bodies.
by unit.
Right.
Yeah, because I was spending some time on NICEAD today and looking through us and comparing us to some of our, the comparable districts and things like that today.
Certainly.
And, of course, the data is only 22, 23, but it shows that there were 58 teachers at Arrowhead. This is only 32.
Right,
That's
so.
pretty significant.
So you have, what's not in here are some of the special education, resource room teachers would not be on this list. So that, we could give you that number as well. So this is, this is the class size report, not the from enrollment, not the total teaching FTE per building. We can, if you want that, we can break that out as well.
Well, just to get a better picture of.
Certainly.
Because those teachers, I guess, also have a load that counts into the contracts and things like that as
Well, it's not so much even, like, for, as I said, a resource room teacher's capped at 5 students per class and 25 total. That's not a three-village thing, that's a state and federal thing, so we have to be very careful with that. But there are some other teachers that teach others, we have speech teachers, we have psychologists, social workers, they are FTEs in a building as well.
Right, but those wouldn't have been counted towards the teaching staff on the NICEAD reports.
believe
They
they
are, yes.
Well,
What's
they-
also in the
they
NICEAD.
list out
Phys
both
ed,
social
art,
workers.
Yeah,
music.
phys ed, art, all the specials, phys ed, art, music, anything that we, when you go to the secondary level, all the different elective courses are also counted in those numbers
But the
too.
social workers wouldn't have been in that, right?
I think they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Because
total,
they did break out counselors and social workers, and there's only but one for each school.
it depends, I'd have to look at the report you're looking at overall. So what I also want to caution you on looking at that too is that number also includes all the people that are on leave. So for instance, when Jeff sent you the number today and it says, okay, there's 570, I think you said approximately, teachers that are on payroll right now, well, 40 of them are LOAs. That means leaves of absence. So that means we have a teacher out on leave, paid leave, and we have another full-time teacher, it's a sub, replacing them at salary. So that takes that number and raises it even higher. So-
But that person would be in a different
Column.
pay category, they would also be in a different.
Correct.
Bargaining group.
Right,
and
not on-
have different benefits.
No, they're, the pay category, depending on how many days they've been in, they switch over from being in the substitute union to being included as a full-time teaching salary at some point in time.
Right, so I guess that messes with the class, the student to teacher ratios.
If you're saying on the SED report, yes, it would. So if you took the population off of that and divided it by what was reported, what you're going to get as an average class size or a student-to-teacher ratio there, yes, it would be different because that's not reflective. This is the actual FTE teaching equivalents in those areas and those classes by the grade levels. We can add the specials in and all that, and we include all that. And just so you know, in the case of the elementary, the number of sections of classes we have determines how many specials we have to offer in the grade level. So for instance, it's a divisor of 28 for phys ed, art, and music, and I think music has an adjustment because of rehearsal periods, and art has a board period put into there. So there's an adjustment for that. So it's not just a straight number, X number of teachers divided into the population, this is the average class size. You can't garner that from that SED report.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said there were going to be staffing cuts of 14 at the elementary?
Elementary.
And how did you get to that number?
By increasing class sizes in some of these grades.
And do you anticipate retirements maybe alleviating some
So
of that?
February 1st has come and passed. We have 22 retirements in the hopper right now, 2 administrators and 20 teachers put in for their retirements. That's in total for the entire district.
How many of those are elementary?
7.
Are any of those savings from the restructuring?
For the elementary, no. The secondary, yes. Because and it's not necessarily because of the restructuring, it's because you have a senior class going out of 525, and there's no class bigger than over 500 in the entire district after that. So it's just by attrition, enrollment's down, and the number of sections we don't need as many sections in the secondary level in some of the grade levels. But 6th grade moving up, wasn't a massive savings of money. We didn't, the IG program in 6th grade will no longer be in 6th grade at the secondary level, so that's the savings there. But we have other positions we have added, like the FLES, into the 6th grade, so they're equivalent to what 6th grade students would experience in another middle school environment and any other district in this state.
So is IG continuing on to the 6th grade then at the junior?
No.
Or is it going to be terminated now?
And for just the 6th grade. The middle level model that both middle school principals and now junior high school principals and Dr. Viscari and Dr. Rinaldi went to, that's not part of the philosophy of what that level looks like. So it's really, everyone's pretty much on the same page. To some parents' chagrin, that they would want to have like an honors, but teachers can differentiate in 6th grade, which is what we're all trained to do anyway. Even if you had an honors class, you'd still be differentiating from student to student. Even if you had an AP course, you'd probably be differentiating, hopefully, between student to student. The difference is AP curriculum is not set by us, that's set by the AP program. Any other questions about class?
Okay, then I guess we'll turn it over to Mr. Carlson for the tax cap.
Okay. Oh, thank you. But before I start with tax cap, I just want to follow up just real quick. Last meeting, when I spoke about our architect, then I heard there was discussion afterwards, like, if I gave the impression that he doesn't get paid, that's not what I meant to say. What I meant was, oftentimes, we'll have a situation in one of our buildings that we ask him for his expertise. He's glad to give it to us and does not send us a bill for it then. Doesn't mean we don't pay him for his services. And along the same lines as all of you, I hope you know you're all volunteering for this, because if anyone's expecting a paycheck at the end of this, you're going to be surprised. He lives in the district. His kids went to school here. He's always been very active in the district, and he's more than happy to lend his expertise to us. That was the point I was making. So anyway, so tax cap is the first real piece of the budget that we need to establish before we can start building the budget. So we have all of the variables in now, and as Kevin mentioned, the staffing meetings are going on, so that then with the retirements now, we'll start to put everything in place and start putting together the line item budget, which will take over the next several weeks. So I just wanted to go over the tax cap calculation with you. Oh, yes, okay, got it. The tax, so if anyone didn't get the handout over on the table over there, please take one. That's the same thing that's up on the screen. So I have the current year 24-25 tax cap calculation, and then next year's cap calculation. So I'll just start with the top row and move on down and explain what all these things are. And this is not my formula. This is established by the by the state comptroller's office for the tax cap. The terms that are used are their terms that we have to use, and the calculation itself, this is not as I said, not something I concocted. So we'll start with prior year tax levy. That's easy enough. Total tax levy that was assessed last year, 169, meaning, so the column 24-25 is the tax cap calculation that we did a year ago for this school year that we're in now. The column on the right is the tax cap calculation that we're doing now for next year. So actually, I'll start with the 25-26. That 174 million, top right corner, that's the current year's total tax levy. compared to 169 million for last year, okay? Next line down, tax base growth factor. That is new construction in the district added to the tax rolls. It's not changing in assessed values when somebody, that number can't be less than 1. It's not, that's not a reflection of somebody grieves their taxes, they get their assessment lowered. This is new construction. That number comes to us from the New York State Office of Real Property Services. So last year, you see it was 1.0, so no increase for that. This year, it's 0.13%. So the order in which all of these things are calculated is also prescribed by the Comptroller's Office. So for next year, take that 174 million, add that 0.13% to it, comes out to the 174.3 million. Prior year pilot. So pilot money, pilot payments, pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. So if a company located in the district is going to, let's say, do some construction on their building, add to it, and they would normally have an increase in their assessed value as a result, they might make a deal with the Town of Brookhaven Industrial Development Agency to say, hey, we're doing this addition on to our company headquarters or our manufacturing plant or whatever it is, and we're going to hire new people, so we want to keep jobs in the area, so that the Industrial Development Agency, or IDA, might make a deal with them to say, okay, we're not going to increase your property taxes for 10 years. So that's the deal, right? So then the IDA will make a payment to us, the school district, and it's in lieu of that business having an increase in their taxes. It may not be dollar for dollar, but whatever their taxes were lowered, it may or may not be what we get from the IDA, but we get something from them. Now, what we get from them, it's called a pilot payment, and it's not additional money for the school district. It actually, by way of this calculation, goes to offset everybody else's taxes. So the way we have to factor this in is, so you see in a year ago's calculation, the prior year pilot, that 901,000, that is what we had actually received in the year before. And then I'm just going to skip down in the 24-25 column for down a few, and you see pilot again, and that number is a negative in red, negative 568,000. That's the upcoming year's pilot, right? So it gets added to the equation into one place, and then the following year's subtracted. Now that number, what we had in a year ago, the 24-25 column, that's pilot and in red, minus 568,000. You see that number, exact number, is in the new calculation for next year for prior year pilot, right? That number has to be the same, regardless of, as it turns out, we didn't get that much, it was something different. For this purpose, this calculation, that number has to be the same. Whatever we used last year as the coming up year's pilot is what we have to use for prior year pilot in this calculation as we go to next year. So that's that in the 25-26 column, the prior year pilot, 568,595. Next line down is prior year capital tax levy, which I'm going to get to in more detail. That's the next page, but don't skip ahead. I'll explain that one in more detail in a couple of minutes. So that is a reduction. Prior year capital tax levy is a reduction in this calculation. We'll see the coming up year's capital tax levy as an addition. Now that don't let the term capital tax levy fool you. It's not a separate tax levy. It's the portion of the total tax levy that's related to capital. Again, my terms, Comptroller's terms. So don't let that fool you, though. It's not a separate tax levy. It's really the piece of the levy related to that. And again, where I mentioned with pilot, what the number that was used last year, a year ago for the upcoming year, has to be exactly the same as what we use in now this year going forward for the prior years, right? That can't change. So that 4 point, where you see in the 25-26 column in red, the minus 4,435,118, you'll see that's the, almost at the bottom of the 24-25 column, that same number. It has to be the same number. All right, so now you add all those together. And that comes out to what they call the adjusted prior year tax levy, all right? So then you apply the levy growth factor. That is the part where you hear it's a 2% tax cap. That's where 2% comes in. The levy growth factor is a term for it, and it cannot be more than 2%. It's tied to the increase in the consumer price index as established by the Comptroller's office. Cannot be more than 2%, but it can be less, and in some years it has been less. So you can see a year ago when we did the 24-25 calculation, and now going forward to next year, it's at 2%. All right, so multiply that, that's a 2% increase onto that. And then we have pilot again, right? So now that is the estimated pilot for next year. Now, what we do, because we don't get it, you see, the numbers aren't, I mean, not that $568,000 is not a lot of money, I don't mean it that way, but some districts get millions and millions of dollars in pilot money. So, comparatively speaking, we don't get a lot of pilot money. So what we do here, we've always done since day one of the tax cap, is this is actually a year behind. So we use actual dollars received in pilot from a year ago. So the 568,000, well, actually the 620,000 that we're saying in the 25-26 column as next year's pilot is what we actually received last year. Full year, complete year, and we do that each year going forward. And we've been audited by the Comptroller's office on our cap calculation several times, and they're fine with that. So this way, I'm not using estimates or guesses, it's actual dollars. And again, that where you saw that the in the 24-25 column pilot, that negative 568,000 in red, that's the number that has to be used. And now that we do the 25-26 cap in prior year pilot, same number has to be used. All right, that's that. Combine all of that, and then that's what's called the tax levy limit. All right, but that's not the tax cap. So then you have exclusions. Now the exclusions, if ERS you see in the 24-25 column, that's the employees retirement system. If the, remember we talked about the retirement systems at the last meeting. The percentage that we have to pay in to the retirement system is called the employer contribution rate. If that percentage goes up by more than 2 percentage points, not 2% of, if it goes from 10% to 12%, that's actually a 5% increase, but 2 percentage points. So if it went from 10% to 13%, for example, that additional 1%, right, the first two percentage points that the employer contribution rate goes up, that's too bad, we have to fit it into our caps now. Anything more than that is an exclusion. Last year, the ERS rate went up by, it's an aggregate, because if you remember from last time, each tier we pay a different rate on employees' retirement system. As an aggregate, it went up by 2.1 percentage points. So that 0.1 percentage points was an exclusion, and that gets added down there. That's that $27,000 that was included in last year's cap. This year, however, it's not going up by more than 2 percentage points, so that's actually, you could put a NA there. We'll do that before we go do this at the board meeting. That's not applicable for this coming up year. So now, and then we get to capital tax levy for the upcoming year. So you see last year, that was 4.4 million. And for next year, 7.1 million. Well, that went up a lot, which we'll get to in just a minute. So then when you add all that together, comes out to the maximum allowable tax levy. And that is the total tax levy, or what we call the tax cap. So last year, that 174 million, that was a 2.84% increase over the prior year. And for this coming up year, it's 180.4 million, which is a 3.64% increase over current year. And why that's so much, I'll get to right now, because the next page is capital tax levy, and that's where that part gets explained. So on the next page, capital tax levy, You see three columns, 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26. And the reason for that is because in last year's tax cap calculation, we had to deal with the prior year capital tax levy, which was 23, 24. Then a year ago, the new year's capital tax levy, which is 24, 25, which is also, now, that's also 25, 26's prior year. And then we have next year, 25, 26 capital tax levy. So I'll explain each of these things now. So first column is debt service. That's our bond payments. So as you can see, that number is decreasing each year because each year, usually it goes down a little bit. And sometimes we have a particular bond got paid off, and that's when it goes down by a chunk. So from the current year, which is $10,865,000 in the middle there, to next year at $9,985,000. The reason for that reduction is we paid off one of our bonds. That was an energy performance contract that we had done in, I think it was 2010? I forget what year. But anyway, this current year that we're in now is the last year of payments for that. So that's the reason for the reduction to next year. All right, so that's debt service payments, bond payments. Next column is capital projects. That's what we put in the budget for the upcoming year for any major construction type projects that we would do. See, 23, 24, we had $1,425,000. Now, prior to the 2021-22 year, we actually had $6.6 million in that. But the 21-22 year, that was the year the budget failed. And one of the ramifications of having a failed budget is no capital projects. So that line went to zero, which is unfortunate because now we lost a lot of money in capital projects that we could have been doing these past few years. And that's only increased the need for the bond referendum that we've been working with the bond committee on. But anyway, so 23, 24, we had $1,425,000. Current year is $3 million in that line. We're recommending the same $3 million for next year. I would like to eventually, over the years, build that back up. There's always work that needs to be done in the buildings, and we don't always want to have to rely on a bond referendum. We can only have those, so often when we have a lot of stuff that needs to be done at the same time. So that's capital projects. BOCES capital, that is our portion of Eastern Suffolk BOCES capital projects in their budget. We have no choice. We have to pay administration fee to BOCES regardless. We could, even if we didn't have a single student attending BOCES or got a single service, we could spend zero at BOCES and we'd still be paying them over $1 million a year for our share of their administration costs. Nothing we can do about it. And this is part of that. So that's BOCES capital. Now the next line down, building aid. So we get, as I talked about before, we get the building aid on capital projects. We get the 66%. I won't go into, one of our board members asked a question about building aid. And it was over the weekend, I was typing, I was like, now he's going to ask this, and then he's going to ask that. So it was quite a long one. But I'd be happy to go over that with anybody, not tonight.
Now the board member won't ask any more questions.
But, I mean, it gets kind of convoluted, but I'd be happy to explain it to anyone, but like I said, that takes a while. So the building aid, though, just more complicated than this, but basically, we get the 66% from the state on approved construction projects. Approved, who approves them? Well, the voters approve them. And when we do the budget, like if we say $3 million for capital projects, that budget gets approved, the voters approve the projects. If we have a bond referendum and the voters approve the bond, the voters approve those capital projects. So we get that 66%. But we used to get the 66% back the following year. We put the money in the budget, we do the project, the budget gets approved, we do the project, next year we got 66% back. That changed a long time ago, back in 2002, I think it was. Now they give us the aid over 15 years, regardless of whether we put it in the budget and paid all the money up front or we did a bond. It's called assumed amortization. And just in case anyone does research on this, there are some projects that would get aid over 20 years and even over 30 years, but that's new construction. The work that we would be doing is 15 years. So the building aid, as it doesn't always match up exactly with the bond. So when we start a bond, now we're doing all the construction and blah, blah, blah. We have to start borrowing the money because we're doing the work. We might not start getting the building aid immediately. We have to finish the project. And so it doesn't always mesh up exactly for the first year or two of a bond, which means also at the end of a bond, it doesn't end exactly. And I think I mentioned last time, in the 2007 bond that we did, most of that bond, there was a couple of different issues of that bond. Most of it was over a 20-year term, even though that aid is over 15-year. And that's old history. If anyone wants to know any more about that, I'd be glad to talk to you about it. But it's not a right and a wrong. It's not what I would do. But you know, when we took one of the other school districts that just had a bond referendum, they actually did a 30-year term. So in their case, you would see, you know, if you do the same amount, just like a mortgage, you do a 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage. Well, the 15-year mortgage, your payments are going to be a lot higher, but you're done 15 years earlier. So, but in this case, the aid ends after 15 years. So we still have a few more years left on that bond, but aid is ending this year on it. So there's not a, like I said, there's not a right and a wrong. It's just the way it is. So we paid it.
Excuse me, but that's a contributing factor to, that's an expense that has to be in the budget.
Yeah, so
So-
that is the chief reason why you see this capital tax levy going in 24-25, that middle column, 4.4 million to 7.1 million next year. Because the building aid is decreasing next year by a lot more than the debt service is decreasing. So what that does is it drives up the tax cap, because that's less money we have from state aid to pay for that debt service, but we still have the debt service payments. And then the last piece on there is our portion of what BOCES gets in building aid, and we get that number from them. That's that last line on there, and then the totals. So that's, again, that's why you see the capital tax levy go from current year, that's the term, capital tax levy. The capital piece of the total tax levy, current year, 4.4 million, next year, 7.1 million. All right, now, the next page is just for informational purposes. The debt service in the current year, on the left side of the page, is 10.8 million. Next year, it's going down to 9.9 million. That's the payoff of one of the old energy performance contract bonds. And then just for informational, this is how much of that 9.9 million in debt service that we'll have next year. That will all end by 2035, and this is how much approximately in each of the years we'll see the reduction. Now, when we get to the 2030-31 year, and you see that reduction of 4,455,000, now the good thing about that is the debt service that's associated with the decrease in building aid that we're seeing now. So when 2030 comes, 30-31 school year, and we see that reduction of 4,455,000, there will not be a corresponding decrease in building aid at that time. We're seeing that now. So what that means then, what I would do, if I were still here, is I would say, well,
What are you trying to say?
I don't think I'll be here then. What I would recommend happen is at least a big chunk of that go into capital projects in that year's budget. It will still be, roughly 2% tax increase that year, because there's not the decrease in building aid, and that's the year to start really building back the capital projects line in the budget.
So, question,
go ahead.
because it'll come up, I'm sure, can any of that go into reserves instead of into the capital line?
No, because it's not, No, 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 it's not, that 4.4 million, that's not money we'll get. It's just money that we won't have to spend in the budget. But what it will do, if you go back to the tax cap calculation, now think about, go to next year, for instance, right? Where we have the, actually go to the next page, the capital tax levy, right? Now, take a look at 25-26, that 9.9 million in debt service for next year. Let's say that number reduced by $5 million, right? So what would happen? Well, that would go down by 5 million. That bottom line, that 7.1 million, would also drop by 5 million. So then, when you go back to the page before that, where at the bottom right on that screen, right, where it's where that 7.1 million in next year's capital tax levy, that's an addition. So that would drop that by 5 million as well. So it would mean the overall tax levy would drop from that projection by 5 million. So that's great. The tax levy would be much lower. That's great. But at some point, we do need to start worrying about things like, we need the money in capital projects, we need money in reserves, we need money in fund balance. That's a way to get a good chunk of money into capital projects where it won't be quite as painful. But also say it that way.
It also could be used to lower the tax.
And at the same
Yeah.
time, right, so it could be and I'm sure, in reality, yeah, it would be a combination of both. Maybe the whole 4.4 million doesn't get added to capital that year, maybe half of it gets added to capital, the other half lowers the tax levy, so. So if you, sometimes when we get closer to budget time each year, you'll hear about occasionally a school district saying, oh, we have a negative tax cap. That's unbelievable. What an outrage. This is why it's so wrong. I think unless they do something different, Comstock is going to have a negative tax cap this coming up year. And that would be the kind of reason why. So that's the perfect time to add some money to capital. And not that we wouldn't need it, but even if you didn't need it, we'll start building a capital reserve then. So when you do need it, it's there. So like if the roof falls in at one of the elementary schools, you have money in capital reserve for it. So, all right. Any questions about the tax cap?
Here we go.
No questions, okay. Next.
Just have one question. Now you're, okay. So regarding the bond, what's the principal of the bond, total bond? The principal amount?
In what we're paying now, well, our total
Yeah.
outstanding principal?
Yeah.
About $53 million is what we owe currently in principal on our existing bonds.
So here talk about the debt services, it's just interest
No, that's principal and interest.
of principal and interest?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good, thanks.
And when we make bond payments, just so you know, it's not it's similar to a mortgage, not exactly like a mortgage. We do a mortgage, a 15-year mortgage, a 30-year mortgage, and there's the amortization table, and the payments are the same for the whole 30 years. With debt service payments, they're called substantially level debt service. They change a little bit. Some years they'll reduce a little more, some years they'll leave in a little more. Similar payments throughout the life of the bond, not exactly the same like in a mortgage. Yes, sir.
So you have some control over the 3.64% that we're looking at for next year because you've got 3 million in the budget for capital expenses.
That's correct.
So if we remove the 3 million from the capital budget because we're about to float a bond, then we could actually get ourselves back down to the 2%.
That is correct.
But that's a really bad idea, because that means we'll have, if something goes wrong, remember the bond isn't covering some of let's say the boiler goes in one of the buildings and we have to replace it immediately. Or you have a flood at Nassau, which has only happened 3 times in the past 10 years. You don't have the money to devote to fixing that immediately. You would have to go to reserves, which the board might have to go to reserves anyway to cover part of it.
What do we have in the capital reserves? I know I've got a sheet around.
We do not have a capital reserve. And if we knew the bond was going to pass, I'd be more comfortable with saying, yeah, let's do that. Or at least cut that 3 million down to $1 million or something. But we don't know that it's going to pass. So,
Like, I would be more comfortable voting for a budget and a bond if I knew that they weren't both going to artificially inflate my taxes.
fair point.
Anyone else?
Any other questions about the tax cap or debt service?
Or anything. Last chance. Last chance, and we'll leave you to it.
So, right before, a little before the meeting, Mr. Insera emailed a question about the number of people within each unit taking insurance, I think it was. Yeah, I saw it right before I came over here, so I'll send that out tomorrow. Again, as always, if you have questions, more information requested, send it. Over the next few weeks, we'll start putting together our initial draft of, first draft of the line item budget. But if, for next time, if there's any particular areas in particular you want to hear about, details on, follow-up questions, whatever, just let us know.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Oh, there you go.
Well,
Sorry, too late. I'm kidding.
no, as per some of my research that I was doing on NICET.gov, I did come up with some comparisons between us and some of the other districts that I would find us comparable to. I'm going to pass these out afterwards. I've got copies for you, too.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
You mentioned you were having a meeting with the elementary school tomorrow, the elementary school leaders tomorrow. Do you have a timeline for when you're meeting with the secondary schools as well?
They're all in tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
All the administrators that oversee departments and buildings will be in tomorrow for that meeting with Dr. Dabrowski and Dr. Mascari to review all the numbers.
Thank you.
You'll see a cloud of smoke like when the Pope is elected, when they come up with a number.